She left a laminated card on my radio table the morning they sent her to the supply room. I didn't know what it was. I set my coffee on it, wiped the ring off with my sleeve, and went to the briefing without reading a word. I know that now the way a man knows a bone he broke wrong. Every time the weather changes, there it is. Her name was on the cell roster as hydrological analysis support, which meant nothing to most of us at FOB Halser. We were a river assault element. What we understood was current and mudbank and the weight of a combat load in chest-deep brown water. What I did not understand, was that reading a river and reading a river are two entirely different things. Major Breck ran the S2 cell. 14 years of service, 3 deployments, a manner of speaking that made whatever he said sound like it had already been verified. He called the morning brief at 0600 in the operations tent, rain hammering the canvas, 19 officers and senior NCOs packed in around a map table with a fan pushing humid air from one side to the other. She was in the back left corner with a green binder and a row of gauge readings clipped to the cover. I noticed her the way you notice something you don't intend to think about. Breck put his pointer on the river at grid reference Cassin 7. Northern crossing site. He said the water levels at the secondary sites were too high for vehicle-capable crossing, that the enemy column we'd been tracking would be forced to Cassin 7 and that our interdiction element needed to be positioned on the southern bank by 1400. He said it the way he said everything, settled, finished, not a thread left loose. She said, "Sir, the Cassin 7 gauge hasn't been read since the 14th. The Morven secondary dropped 11 centimeters in the last 4 days." Breck looked at her the way a man looks at a door that opened on its own. "The Morven secondary is a tidal backflow channel," he said. "It floods at phase 2 monsoon." "It did flood," she said. "It receded. The current rate of drop puts it at vehicle-capable crossing by tonight. I have 11 weeks of readings." Breck set his pointer down. He said, slowly, that he appreciated the analysis support, that hydrological attaches provided a useful supplement to the cell's intelligence product, and that he would flag her clearance supplement for review. He said, logistics attaché, when he said it the second time, and the room heard the downgrade even if nobody said anything. I heard it. I said nothing. He told her the supply coordination element needed a hand with the forward manifests, that the rear room was short-staffed, and that her gauge data would be filed with the supplemental record. She picked up her binder. She walked to my radio table on the way out. I was standing beside it, and she set a laminated card on the surface without looking at me. A small card, the size of a field notebook page. 11 rows of gauge readings, dates and times in a small hand, a red line drawn across the Morven secondary gauge column at the vehicle-capable threshold. The line was labeled. The label said, Phase 2 recede. The date on the most recent entry was 3 days prior. There was a handwritten grid reference at the bottom. I read none of it. I put my coffee on it and went to my boats. We crossed at 1340. For assault craft, 2 element leaders, 11 riflemen, a radio operator, and a weapons team with a machine gun on the starboard bow of the lead boat. The rain had led up to a drizzle and the river was the color of weak tea. I remember the smell, teak rot and diesel, and that flat mineral smell brown water carries when it's carrying something down from the hills. I remember the way the current pushed the bows left and the drivers compensating, the way the canopy overhead was thick enough that you lost the sky. I remember the mudbank on the far side catching the bow of the lead craft at an angle, the way the driver corrected, the way the machine gunner shifted his weight and settled it again. The first burst came from a spider hole 6 meters above the mud line, dug into a teak root system. The second and third came from 2 separate positions in the tree line, maybe 15 meters apart, interlocking fields of fire. We were chest deep in the water before I understood what was happening. Pryor went down in the mud at the bank lip, hit in the arm and the thigh. Kellum was behind him and got flat. The rest of the element fell back into the water and the lead craft took fire through the hull. The radio went in the river. Pryor and Kellum were on the bank and could not move. I was in the water with my rifle above my head and no good angle on anything. We had 2 men on the wrong side of a river with a machine gun between us and them. The secondary radio was with my lead boat, 8 meters away, listing toward the cut bank with water coming in through the hull. I got to it. The boat driver, Ruiz, held the stern while I worked the handset. I gave the grid, gave the situation, gave the personnel count on the far bank and the direction of fire. I did not know what I was asking for. I did not have a mortar grid. I did not have anything. I was calling into the net the way a man calls into a dark house. Her voice came back on the net 40 seconds later. Not the fire support coordinator. Not the S2 cell. Her. She was in the rear supply room with her binder and a secondary radio terminal. She'd apparently been running her gauge data through all morning, because the supply room shared a frequency band with the forward fire net and she had been listening. She said, "Meek, I have your position. Enemy column is crossing at Morven Secondary. What you're seeing is a security element. Give me 2 minutes." I said, "What do you need 2 minutes for?" She said, "I'm reading." I held the handset and watched the tree line. Pryor had gotten himself to a root system below the lip of the bank and was holding pressure on his own thigh. Kellum was flat in a depression that wasn't deep enough. The spider hole position fired twice more to keep us from the bank. Ruiz had his hand in the hull breech. Her voice came back in 1 minute and 40 seconds. She gave me a grid. Not the grid I was at. A grid 200 meters downstream, on the far bank, behind the tree line. She said it was the base of the secondary fire position, that the primary machine gun nest was fixed on our crossing angle and would not pivot in time, and that a mortar round at her grid would suppress the secondary and open a lateral approach to Pryor and Kellum along the route line. She said it the way she'd said everything in that briefing tent, like it was already true and she was just reading it aloud. I relayed the grid to the FOB mortar team. The round went in 11 seconds later. The secondary position went quiet. The primary machine gun continued for 8 more seconds, then it stopped. I learned later the mortar team had seen the displacement from the first round and adjusted. Kellum got to Pryor. I got to them both with Ruiz. We had Pryor in a boat within 4 minutes. We lost no one. I did not understand, until I was back at FOB Halser with a cup of bad coffee and my wet boots drying on the floor of the operations tent and Pryor already in the forward aid station with his thigh wrapped, what she had done. I did not understand it because I had not read the card. When I went to the radio table and found it still there, coffee ring and all, I read it for the first time. The Morven secondary gauge column. The red line. The vehicle capable threshold. The date of the most recent entry, 3 days prior, the day before the briefing, the day she'd stood in the back left corner of the tent and told Breck the water had receded. The grid reference at the bottom of the card matched the grid she'd given me on the net. She had written it there 3 days ago. I brought the card to Colonel Harwick. He was in the operations room with his XO when I came in. I put the card on his map table. I told him where it came from and when the readings were made and what grid was printed at the bottom. I told him what had happened at the crossing. He listened without interrupting, which was not his habit. He looked at the card for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked at me. "Where is she?" "Supply room, sir." He took the card and walked out. I followed him because I did not know what else to do. We went through the rain to the rear supply room, which was a timber-framed structure with a corrugated roof and 3 folding tables and a wall of manifests on wooden pegs. She was at the center table with her green binder open, making entries in a small hand. She did not look up when the door opened. Harwick said her name. She looked up. He said, "I want to read your log." She set her pen down and passed the binder across the table. He stood there in the supply room with rain on his collar and read it page by page. 11 weeks of gauge entries for 7 river points, daily readings twice a day from a handheld gauge she'd been taking herself before and after cell hours, a summary analysis every Sunday in a different colored ink. The Morven secondary had a full column of its own. The recede rate was plotted in pencil along the bottom margin, a small graph, 12 data points. The vehicle capable threshold was marked. The projected date range for the crossing window was marked. It read, Phase 2 recede window, 72 to 96 hours from September 11th. The briefing had been on the 14th. Her last entry was the 13th. She had given Breck a summary of this analysis in the tent and he had sent her to count manifests. Harwick turned to the last page and read it to himself. Then he read it aloud. He did not intend to, I think, the words simply came out of him, low and flat, the way you read something that lands on you hard. He read the projected crossing grid reference. He read the vehicle capable threshold date. He read the summary sentence she'd written at the bottom of the final page. Casson, 7 is a diversion. The column will cross Morven Secondary. The supply room was quiet except for the rain on the roof. He closed the binder. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood straight in the doorway and rendered a salute. Not the quick functional kind. A full, deliberate salute, his hand held at his brow until she returned it, his posture the posture of a man paying a debt he'd been unaware he owed. Major Breck was standing behind him. I don't know when he'd followed us. He had the laminated gauge card in his hand. Harwick must have left it on the map table. He stood in the rain at the supply room door and looked at the card and then at the binder and then at her. He did not speak. He set the card down on the nearest manifest peg as carefully as a man setting down something he doesn't know how to carry, and he walked back toward the operations tent. Harwick requested her reassignment to the analysis cell before end of day. She was back at her table in the S2 room by the following morning. I kept the laminated gauge card. It lives in my waterproof map case, folded behind the acetate, and it has been in every map case I've carried since FOB Halser. When I run river crossing element training now, and I've run it for 11 years, I tell my soldiers that the river gives you information before you cross it. I tell them the gauge is a sentence the river is writing, and that you have to read it, not just look at it. I tell them what to measure and when to measure it and what a recede rate means for vehicle-capable crossing in a monsoon theater. I don't tell them who taught me. I'm not sure I could explain it right, or find the words that would land the way the thing itself landed. What I know is that she read 11 weeks of data in a room she'd been sent to as a punishment, found a grid that matched exactly the one she'd written 3 days earlier, and put it on the net in under 2 minutes while 2 of my men were on a cut bank in someone else's field of fire. The gauge card still has the coffee ring on it. I never tried to clean it off. It's the most accurate thing I own.